A universe where the stars aren't just distant lights. They're alive, watching us, and hiding secrets we were never meant to know. I'm Emily Carter, an astronomer who stumbled upon a signal from Titan that changed everything. It warned of the fall of the Galactic Council and told us to trust no one. Now, my team and I are racing against time to uncover the truth, but what we've found is beyond anything we could have imagined. The stars themselves are against us, and a cosmic threat looms on the horizon. This is our story, Betrayed by the Stars, the fall of the Galactic Council. Are you ready to hear it? Please subscribe, like, comment, and share. Don't forget to hit the bell. Let's dive into the thrilling story. Betrayed by the Stars. The fall of the Galactic Council story begins as the stars were never supposed to betray us. They were supposed to guide us, to light our way across the vast, endless cosmos. But on the night of the fall, the stars themselves seemed to turn against humanity. It all began with a single message broadcast across the galaxy. Asterisk, the Galactic Council has fallen. Trust no one. Asterisk, the message came from Titan, Saturn's icy moon, and it was the last thing anyone heard before the chaos began. On Earth, in a small observatory tucked away in the Rocky Mountains, a young astronomer named Emily Carter stared at her screen, her heart pounding. Her fingers trembled as she replayed the message. "This can't be real," she whispered to herself, her green eyes wide with fear. Her red curls bounced as she shook her head, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. The Galactic Council, the most powerful alliance in the galaxy, the guardians of peace and order. Gone? It was unthinkable. Beside her, her best friend and fellow scientist, Jake Thompson, leaned over her shoulder. His dark hair was messy, and his glasses were slightly crooked, but his sharp mind was always focused. "Emily," he said, his voice low and urgent, "this isn't just some prank. This is real. The Galactic Council, they're gone." Emily turned to him, her face pale. But how? Who could have taken them down? They were untouchable. Jake frowned, his brow furrowing as he adjusted his glasses. "I don't know, but we need to find out. And we need to be careful. If the stars themselves are against us, who can we trust?" The two of them sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the message sinking in. Outside, the night sky was clear, the stars twinkling innocently as if nothing had changed. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. "We should call Dr. Hayes," she said finally, breaking the silence. "If anyone can help us figure this out, it's him." Jake nodded. "Good idea, but let's not say too much over the comms. If the council really has fallen, we don't know who's listening." Emily hesitated, then picked up her communicator and dialed the number for Dr. Samuel Hayes, their former mentor and one of the brightest minds in astrophysics. The call connected after a few rings, and Dr. Hayes's gravelly voice came through. "Emily? Jake? It's late. What's going on?" Emily took a deep breath. "Dr. Hayes, something's happened. We just received a message, a broadcast from Titan. It said the Galactic Council has fallen. We need your help." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Dr. Hayes finally spoke, his voice was heavy with concern. "I've been expecting this. Come to my cabin. And be careful. Trust no one." The line went dead, and Emily and Jake exchanged a worried glance. "What does he mean he's been expecting this?" Jake asked, his voice tinged with unease. "I don't know," Emily replied, her mind racing. "But we need to find out." They packed their things quickly, grabbing their data pads and a few essential tools. As they stepped outside, the cool mountain air hit them, and Emily couldn't help but look up at the stars. They seemed so peaceful, so unchanging. But now they felt like a lie. The drive to Dr. Hayes's cabin was tense, the silence between them filled with unspoken questions. When they arrived, the old scientist was waiting for them on the porch, his white hair wild and his eyes gleaming with a mix of fear and excitement. "I've been expecting you," he said as they approached. "The stars, they've been acting strange for weeks. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure, but now," he trailed off, shaking his head. "Now what?" Emily asked, her heart pounding. Dr. Hayes looked at her, his expression grave. "Now, we need to prepare. Because if the Galactic Council has fallen, it's only the beginning." As they followed him inside, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced back at the sky one last time, the stars twinkling innocently above. But deep down, she knew something was coming. Something terrible, and it was closer than they thought. The cabin was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of old books and burnt coffee. Dr. Hayes motioned for Emily and Jake to sit at the cluttered table, where stacks of papers and star charts were scattered. His hands trembled slightly as he poured them each a cup of coffee, his eyes darting to the windows as if expecting someone or something to appear. "You said you've been expecting this," Emily began, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "What did you mean? What's going on?" Dr. Hayes sighed, sinking into his chair. "For weeks, I've been tracking anomalies in the stars. At first, I thought it was just random fluctuations, solar flares, gravitational waves, things like that. But then I noticed a pattern. The stars, they're communicating." Jake leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Communicating? With who?" "With each other," Dr. Hayes replied, his voice low. "And with us. The Galactic Council knew about it. They've been studying it for years, trying to decode the messages. But something went wrong. I think they found out too much." Emily's heart raced. "Found out what?" Dr. Hayes hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at the window again. "The stars aren't just balls of gas and light, Emily. They're alive, and they've been watching us." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Jake broke the silence first, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You're saying the stars are sentient?" "Not just sentient," Dr. Hayes said, his voice grave. "They're ancient, older than the galaxy itself. And they've been waiting." "Waiting for what?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Dr. Hayes could answer, the lights in the cabin flickered, and a low hum filled the air. Emily's skin prickled as the hum grew louder, vibrating through the walls and into her bones. She exchanged a worried glance with Jake, who was already on his feet, his eyes scanning the room. "What's that?" Jake asked, his voice tense. Dr. Hayes stood, his face pale. "They're here." The windows rattled, and a blinding light flooded the cabin, forcing them to shield their eyes. When the light faded, the hum was gone, but the air felt heavier, charged with an unseen energy. "What was that?" Emily demanded, her voice shaking. Dr. Hayes didn't answer. Instead, he hurried to a locked cabinet in the corner of the room and pulled out a small metallic device. It was unlike anything Emily had ever seen, sleek and glowing faintly with a blue light. "This," Dr. Hayes said, holding it up, "is a star key. The Council gave it to me years ago in case of an emergency. It's the only way to access their archives, the only way to find out what they discovered." Jake's eyes widened. "You're saying the Council left behind a way for us to figure this out?" "Yes," Dr. Hayes said, his voice grim. "But it's not just about figuring it out. It's about survival. The stars, they're not just watching us. They're coming for us." Emily's stomach churned. "What do you mean, coming for us?" Dr. Hayes hesitated, then said, "The Council's archives are hidden on Titan. That's where the last broadcast came from. We need to go there. But it won't be easy. The stars know we're onto them, and they'll do everything they can to stop us." Jake crossed his arms, his jaw tight. "So what? We're just supposed to fly to Titan and hope we don't get vaporized by sentient stars." "Pretty much," Dr. Hayes said with a grim smile. "But we don't have a choice. If we don't figure out what the Council knew, we're all dead anyway." The room fell silent again, the weight of their mission settling over them. Emily looked at the star key in Dr. Hayes' hand, its faint glow pulsing like a heartbeat. "When do we leave?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "Now," Dr. Hayes said, his eyes filled with determination. "We don't have a moment to lose." As they gathered their things and headed for the door, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced up at the sky, the stars twinkling innocently above. But now they felt like eyes, cold, calculating, and waiting. And as they climbed into Dr. Hayes' old, battered spacecraft, Emily couldn't help but wonder, were they flying toward the answers they needed, or straight into a trap? The spacecraft rattled as it broke through Earth's atmosphere, the stars outside the window growing sharper and brighter with every passing second. Emily sat in the co-pilot's seat, her hands gripping the armrests tightly. She had never been this far from home before, and the vastness of space was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. "You okay?" Jake asked, glancing at her from the pilot's seat. His hands moved deftly over the controls, his usual confidence tempered by the gravity of their mission. Emily nodded, though her stomach was in knots. "Yeah, just never thought I'd be flying to Titan to uncover a galactic conspiracy." Dr. Hayes, seated behind them, chuckled dryly. "Welcome to the club. The stars have a way of appending even the best-laid plans." The journey to Titan was tense, the silence broken only by the hum of the engines and the occasional beep of the navigation system. Emily spent most of the time studying the star key, its faint blue glow casting eerie shadows on the walls of the cabin. "Do you think the council knew this would happen?" she asked, turning to Dr. Hayes. "That the stars would turn against us?" Dr. Hayes sighed, his expression grim. "I think they suspected. The stars have always been unpredictable, but they never imagined it would come to this." Before Emily could respond, the ship's alarms blared, and the control panel lit up with warning lights. Jake's hands flew over the controls, his voice tense. "We got a problem. Something's on our tail." Emily's heart leaped into her throat. "What do you mean, on our tail?" Jake pointed to the radar screen, where a small, fast-moving object was closing in on them. "It's not a ship. I don't know what it is, but it's gaining on us." Dr. Hayes leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "It's them, the stars. They're trying to stop us." The ship shuddered as the object drew closer, and Emily's stomach lurched. "What do we do?" "Hold on," Jake said, his voice tight. He yanked the controls to the side, sending the ship into a sharp dive. The object shot past them, missing by inches, and Emily let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. But the relief was short-lived. The object looped around, coming back toward them with terrifying speed. "We can't outrun it," Jake said, his voice tinged with panic. "It's too fast." Dr. Hayes grabbed the star key from Emily's hands, his eyes blazing with determination. "We don't need to outrun it. We need to outsmart it." He plugged the star key into the ship's control panel, and the cabin was flooded with a blinding blue light. The ship's systems whirred to life, and a holographic map of the solar system appeared in the air. "What are you doing?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Buying us time," Dr. Hayes replied, his fingers flying over the controls. "The star key can disrupt their signals, but only for a few minutes. We need to get to Titan before they recover." The ship lurched forward, its engines roaring as it accelerated towards Saturn's moon. The object behind them faltered, its movements becoming erratic as the star key's energy disrupted its systems. "It's working," Jake said, his voice filled with relief. But Emily's eyes were fixed on the holographic map, where a new object had appeared, a massive, glowing structure on Titan's surface. "What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Hayes followed her gaze, his expression grim. "That," he said, "is the Council's archive, and it's our only hope." As the ship descended toward Titan, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The stars had tried to stop them, and they had barely escaped. But what awaited them on Titan might be even more dangerous. And as the ship touched down on the icy surface, Emily couldn't help but wonder, were they about to uncover the truth or unleash something far worse? The surface of Titan was a frozen wasteland, the icy ground crunching beneath their boots as Emily, Jake, and Dr. Hayes stepped out of the spacecraft. The air was thin and cold, their breath visible in the dim light of Saturn's rings reflecting off the icy terrain. Ahead of them loomed the massive structure they had seen from orbit, a towering, metallic archive that seemed to pulse faintly with a blue light, matching the glow of the star key in Dr. Hayes' hand. "This is it," Dr. Hayes said, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. "The Council's archive. Everything they knew about the stars is in there." Emily shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. "Let's hope it's worth the trip." The group moved cautiously toward the structure, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. As they approached, the massive doors of the archive slid open with a low groan, revealing a dark, cavernous interior. The air inside was warmer, but it carried a strange, metallic scent that made Emily's skin crawl. "Stay close," Jake said, his voice tense as he activated a flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating walls covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly, like the ones on the star key. "These symbols," Emily said, running a hand over the carvings. "They're the same as the ones on the key. It's like a language." Dr. Hayes nodded, his eyes scanning the walls. The council spent decades trying to decode it. They believed it was a message from the stars, a warning, or maybe a set of instructions. "Instructions for what?" Jake asked, his voice echoing in the vast space. Before Dr. Hayes could answer, the ground beneath them began to tremble, and the symbols on the walls flared to life, bathing the archive in a bright blue light. A low hum filled the air, growing louder and louder until it was almost deafening. "What's happening?" Emily shouted, her voice barely audible over the noise. Dr. Hayes's face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "It's a security system. The archive knows we're here." The walls began to shift, panels sliding open to reveal glowing orbs that hovered in the air, their light pulsating in time with the hum. Emily's heart raced as the orbs moved closer, surrounding them in a circle of light. "What do we do?" Jake asked, his voice tight with panic. Dr. Hayes held up the star key, his hands trembling. "This is the only way. It's the key to the archive. It should deactivate the system." He pressed the key into a slot on the wall, and the orbs froze in place, their light dimming slightly. The hum faded, and the archive fell silent once more. "It worked," Emily said, letting out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. But the relief was short-lived. The walls of the archive began to shift again, this time revealing a massive holographic display. A figure appeared, a humanoid alien with glowing blue eyes and a voice that echoed through the chamber. "You have activated the archive," the figure said, its voice deep and resonant. Asterisk, but be warned, the knowledge within comes at a price. Asterisk, Emily's heart pounded. "What price?" The figure's eyes narrowed, and the holographic display shifted, showing images of stars collapsing, galaxies being consumed by darkness, and a massive, shadowy entity that seemed to devour everything in its path. "The void," the figure said. Asterisk, "it is coming, and the stars will not save you." Asterisk, Dr. Hayes stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "What do we need to do?" The figure's gaze shifted to him, its expression unreadable. Asterisk, "The key is not just a tool. It is a weapon. But to wield it, you must understand the truth about the stars, and the truth about yourselves." Asterisk, before anyone could respond, the ground shook violently, and the holographic display flickered out. The archive's walls began to close in, the symbols on them glowing brighter and brighter. "We need to get out of here," Jake shouted, grabbing Emily's arm. But Dr. Hayes hesitated, his eyes fixed on the star key. "No, we need to stay. This is what we came for. The answers are here." Emily's heart raced as the walls closed in around them. The truth about the stars and the void was within their grasp. But as the archive began to collapse, she couldn't help but wonder, were they about to uncover the answers they needed or unleash something far worse? The walls of the archive groaned as they shifted, the glowing symbols pulsing faster and faster like a countdown to disaster. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she grabbed Dr. Hayes' arm, her voice sharp with urgency. "We need to go. Now." But Dr. Hayes stood frozen, his eyes locked on the star, key still embedded in the wall. "No," he said, his voice trembling but resolute. "This is our only chance. If we leave now, we'll never know the truth." Jake grabbed his other arm, his face pale but determined. "Doc, the truth won't matter if we're crushed to death. We can't help anyone if we're dead." The ground shook violently, and a chunk of the ceiling broke loose, crashing to the floor just feet away. Emily's breath came in short gasps as she looked around, her mind racing. "There!" she shouted, pointing to a narrow corridor that had opened up behind the holographic display. "That way." The three of them sprinted down the corridor, the walls closing in behind them as the archive continued to collapse. The air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of burning metal, and the faint hum that had filled the archive earlier had turned into a deafening roar. "Where does this lead?" Jake shouted, his voice barely audible over the noise. "I don't know," Emily replied, her lungs burning as they ran. "But it's our only way out." The corridor ended abruptly in a circular chamber, its walls covered in the same glowing symbols as the rest of the archive. At the center of the room was a pedestal, and on top of it sat a massive crystal, its surface shimmering with the same blue light as the star key. Dr. Hayes stopped in his tracks, his eyes wide with awe. This is it, the heart of the archive. Emily's heart raced as she approached the crystal, her reflection distorted in its shimmering surface. "What is it?" "A data core," Dr. Hayes said, his voice filled with reverence. "It contains everything the Council knew about the stars and the void." Before anyone could react, the ground shook again, and the walls of the chamber began to crack. Jake grabbed Emily's arm, his voice tight with panic. "We don't have time for this. We need to go." But Dr. Hayes stepped forward, his hands trembling as he reached for the crystal. "No, this is why we came. We need to know the truth." As his fingers touched the crystal, a surge of energy shot through the room, and the symbols on the walls flared to life. The air was filled with a low, resonant hum, and a holographic image appeared above the pedestal. A star map, but unlike any Emily had ever seen. "What is that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "A map of the void's path," Dr. Hayes said, his voice filled with awe. "It's coming, and it's closer than we thought." The image shifted, showing a massive, shadowy entity moving through the galaxy, consuming everything in its path. Emily's stomach churned as she realized the truth. "It's not just coming for us. It's coming for the stars." Dr. Hayes nodded, his expression grim. "The stars created the void. They thought they could control it, but they were wrong. And now it's coming to destroy them, and us." Before anyone could respond, the ground shook again, and the walls of the chamber began to collapse. Jake grabbed Emily's arm, his voice sharp with urgency. "We need to go. Now." But as they turned to leave, the holographic image shifted again, showing a single, glowing point on the map, a planet Emily recognized immediately. "That's Earth," she said, her voice trembling. "Why is it showing us Earth?" Dr. Hayes's face paled as he realized the truth. "Because that's where the void is heading next." The ground shook violently, and the walls of the chamber began to collapse. The three of them sprinted back down the corridor, the archive crumbling around them. As they reached the entrance, the massive doors began to close, sealing the archive and its secrets forever. But as they stepped outside, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were too late. The void was coming, and they were running out of time. The icy winds of Titan howled around them as Emily, Jake, and Dr. Hayes stumbled out of the collapsing archive, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the massive structure behind them groaned as it crumbled into itself, sealing away the secrets of the Galactic Council and the truth about the void. "We need to get back to the ship," Jake said, his voice tight with urgency. "If the void is heading for Earth, we don't have much time." Emily nodded, her mind racing. The image of the void's path burned in her memory, the shadowy entity consuming everything in its wake. But how do we stop it? The archive is gone. We don't even know where to start. Dr. Hayes clutched the star key tightly, his face pale but determined. The key is more than just a tool. It's a weapon. The Council designed it to fight the void, but they never got the chance to use it. We have to try. The three of them sprinted across the icy terrain, their boots slipping on the frozen ground. The spacecraft loomed ahead, its lights flickering in the dim light of Saturn's rings. As they climbed aboard, Jake immediately began powering up the engines, his hands moving swiftly over the controls. "We're not going to make it back to Earth in time," he said, his voice tense. "The void is moving too fast." Dr. Hayes leaned over the control panel, his eyes scanning the data. "We don't need to go to Earth. We need to intercept the void before it gets there." Emily's heart raced as she strapped herself into her seat. "And how do we do that? We don't even know where it is." Dr. Hayes held up the star key, its blue glow casting eerie shadows on the walls of the cabin. The key can track it. It's attuned to the void's energy signature. If we follow its signal, we can find it. The ship's engines roared to life, and they shot into the sky, leaving Titan's icy surface behind. The stars outside the window blurred as they accelerated, the tension in the cabin palpable. "What happens when we find it?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dr. Hayes hesitated, his expression grim. "We use the key. It's designed to disrupt the void's energy, to destabilize it. But it's never been tested. We don't know if it will work." Emily's stomach churned. "And if it doesn't?" Dr. Hayes met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Then we're all dead anyway." The ship's alarms blared, and the control panel lit up with warning lights. Jake's hands flew over the controls, his voice sharp with panic. "We got company." Emily's heart leaped into her throat as she looked at the radar screen. A massive, shadowy shape was moving toward them, its form shifting and swirling like a storm. "It's the void," Dr. Hayes said, his voice trembling. "It's found us." The ship shuddered as the void drew closer, its dark tendrils reaching out like claws. Emily's hands clenched into fists, her mind racing. "What do we do?" Dr. Hayes held up the star key, his hands trembling. "We fight." He plugged the key into the ship's control panel, and the cabin was flooded with a blinding blue light. The ship's systems whirred to life, and a holographic display appeared in the air, showing the void's energy signature. "The key is charging," Dr. Hayes said, his voice tight. "We need to hold it off until it's ready." The ship shuddered again as the void's tendrils lashed out, striking the hull with a deafening crash. Jake yanked the controls to the side, sending the ship into a sharp dive. "We can't outrun it." "We don't need to outrun it," Dr. Hayes said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We just need to buy time." Emily's heart pounded as she watched the holographic display, the key's energy levels slowly rising. The void was closing in, its dark form filling the view outside the window. "Come on," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Come on." The ship shook violently, and the lights flickered. Jake's hands flew over the controls, his voice sharp with panic. "We're losing power." Dr. Hayes's eyes were fixed on the holographic display, his face pale. "Just a little longer." The void's tendrils wrapped around the ship, squeezing tighter and tighter. The hull groaned under the pressure, and Emily's heart raced as she realized they were running out of time. And then, with a blinding flash of light, the star key activated. The blinding flash of light from the star key filled the cabin, forcing Emily, Jake, and Dr. Hayes to shield their eyes. The ship shuddered violently as the void's tendrils recoiled, its dark form writhing in pain. The hum of the key grew louder, resonating through the ship and into the very fabric of space around them. "It's working," Dr. Hayes shouted, his voice filled with a mix of relief and awe. "The key is disrupting the void's energy." Emily's heart raced as she watched the holographic display, the void's massive form flickering and distorting as the key's energy surged through it. But the relief was short-lived. The void wasn't retreating, it was fighting back. "We're not out of this yet," Jake said, his hands gripping the controls tightly. "The void's energy levels are spiking. It's trying to overpower the key." The ship shook violently as the void lashed out again, its tendrils striking the hull with a deafening crash. The lights flickered and the control panel sparked, sending a shower of sparks into the air. "We're losing power," Jake shouted, his voice sharp with panic. "If we don't do something, the key won't hold." Dr. Hayes's face was pale, his eyes fixed on the holographic display. "The key needs more energy. It's not strong enough to destroy the void on its own." Emily's mind raced as she looked around the cabin, her eyes landing on the ship's power core. "What if we give it more energy? What if we use the ship's power to amplify the key?" Dr. Hayes's eyes widened. "It could work, but it's risky. If we divert all power to the key, we'll be defenseless." "We don't have a choice," Emily said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "If we don't stop the void now, we're all dead anyway." Jake nodded, his jaw tight. "Do it." Dr. Hayes hesitated for a moment, then began rerouting the ship's power to the star key. The cabin lights dimmed, and the engines sputtered as the key's glow intensified, its energy surging through the ship and into the void. The void's form began to destabilize, its dark tendrils dissolving into nothingness as the key's energy overwhelmed it. But the ship was dying, its systems failing one by one. "We're losing life support," Jake shouted, his voice tinged with desperation. "We need to get out of here." Emily's heart pounded as she looked at the void, its massive form flickering and fading. "Just a little longer. We're so close." The ship shook violently, and the control panel exploded in a shower of sparks. The lights went out, plunging the cabin into darkness. The only light came from the star key, its glow growing brighter and brighter until it was almost blinding. And then, with a deafening roar, the void exploded, its dark form disintegrating into a shower of light that filled the sky. The ship was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the star key as its glow faded. Emily's heart raced as she looked around the cabin, her breath coming in short gasps. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Hayes nodded, his face pale but filled with relief. "It's over. The void is gone." Jake slumped in his seat, his hands trembling as he ran them through his hair. "We did it. We actually did it." But as the adrenaline began to fade, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The star key, now dark and lifeless, lay on the control panel, its surface cracked and broken. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Hayes sighed, his expression grim. "Now we rebuild. The stars are still out there, and they're still watching. But we've proven that we can fight back." As the ship drifted through the silent void, Emily looked out the window at the stars, their light twinkling innocently above. But now, they felt different, less like enemies and more like allies. And as the ship's systems slowly came back online, Emily couldn't help but wonder what other secrets were hidden among the stars, waiting to be discovered.